incredibly pleased to welcome our keynote speaker, who's Katie SCHMID from the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, where she serves as the Deputy Executive Director. And here to talk about New York City's energy transition and some of the things that they put forward in their Power NYC plan, and really moving forward with the compliance, whether it's local law 87, adding in local law 2, and hopefully we'll hear about that, and thinking about equity as a core principle in our energy transition. So with that, Katie said if there are questions during her presentation, we can stop and take those. We'll definitely have time at the end for additional conversation. I know this is a lively and spirited bunch, and I look forward to first hearing from Katie and then hearing Katie respond to all the interesting things that you're going to ask her. I just want a special note to two people. One to Madison Herzog, who is an alumni who works in Katie's office and could not be here today, for helping us, and also to Rich Miller for helping us have Katie come and join us. So thank you, and we'll get started.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I really enjoy when I get to come back and talk to lawyers because it's where my roots are, and I think there's a level of discourse that's just really exciting and validating. So my name's Katie SCHMID. I am the Deputy Executive Director in the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. My portfolio includes our energy portfolio, that's our regulatory proceeding participation, our work with energy infrastructure, and are thinking about how do we create a power system of the future for New York City that is not just clean, but also reliable and affordable, particularly for our most vulnerable communities and people. I think that what we're all seeing is how incredibly expensive the transition is going to be. And New York City is often in a unique place because we really have to take to heart more than just the green part. Not only because we represent the people who make us up, and we are often a direct point of communication to the people who feel these changes every day in their buildings, in their utility bills, but also because we own and operate massive infrastructure, incredibly complex social services, and we're a ratepayer too. And so we really are able to inform our policy through the services we provide, the operations we have to undertake. And I think that really adds a concreteness to the way that we approach energy policy. And then I also hold the buildings portfolio in our office. So not just how do we change the infrastructure, but also how do we manage transforming all of the buildings we see around us, but also the buildings in other neighborhoods, different typologies that have different uses for different populations. How do we make them not just lower carbon, but also healthier for the people who live and work there? And so I truly encourage you to jump in if you have a question about something. I have a hard time doing a high level gloss over many, many things. I like to go in deep on one particular thing, and I'm more than happy to do that. So really interrupt me with questions because I'm happy to take them. But what I was going to talk a little bit about today is what the city can do, what are the levers that we have to inform these transitions, but then also where does the city not have levers? Where do we need our partners, whether the partners are our state and federal regulators and actors, whether it's the private sector, whether it's the communities, where can't we do it alone? And I think, that's obvious, right? Because different levels of governance and different participants in the market have different powers and authorities. But I also think that we're in a moment right now where it's becoming really clear that each of the partners in this transition are going to go through moments where they can do a lot and moments where we can do less for whatever reason. And we need all of the partners to be working as hard as they can, because there are times when the market's a little broken or interest rates are high, and that impedes a certain type of action. There are moments when elected officials lose their political will and courage, and we need to continue to like fight the fight at other levels of government. New York City is going through a moment right now, and we'll see where it goes, and we'll work our way out of it. I think that that's part of why I want to bring this work back to the work that me and my colleagues do every day, because that work's going to continue, right? Like, I've worked for 3 different administrations. I'm a civil servant. My colleagues are civil servants. And so we'll ebb and flow with the game pieces that we have. And we need everyone to be playing that game as well as they can, because everyone brings something different to the table and kind of thrives in different moments. So, the way kind of I bucket my portfolio is, how do we bring clean energy to New York City? And then how do we transform the grid that we have, the energy systems and infrastructures that we have within our borders? How do we transform our buildings to use this energy that we are bringing and distributing within New York City? And then, there's the last question of how do we reform our transportation and improve our transit systems? And I'll focus on the first 3, but if you have questions about transportation, also happy to take them. And so, I was listening to the comments just a few minutes ago on RECs, and it was just striking to me the difference of perspective and how, like, our role as a city, I think, really shapes how we develop policies around pieces of the puzzle that others see from a really different perspective, like from a financing perspective, from a markets perspective. But New York City builds big infrastructure. We have a gigantic capital budget, and we don't need to go get financing for things. We like systems, and we think very concretely about those systems. And so, how do we get energy to New York for us is a really concrete question. We are sure we're focused on the generation, and I think a lot of people are, and that's super important. But our particular problem is the transmission. And, we are still a city where our grid is 80% powered by fossil fuels. Upstate New York, the grid is powered by 80% renewable resources. So one reason we have a locality requirement in our RECs rules relating to Local Law 97 is because we need to actually get power here. Even if we stayed within power generated in New York State, it doesn't do us a lot of good in terms of transitioning our grid. And I think there are a lot of places where New York City is leading by example. So, and what the city brought to the table is last year we executed a contract with NYSERDA to purchase sufficient Tier 4 RECs from Champlain Hudson and from Clean Path New York to power all of city government operations with clean energy. And we saw that as important because it was our commitment, amongst others, and many other people were responsible for this, but that allowed those 2 projects to obtain financing and actually get the transmission lines built, right? So that it's additionality, it's new infrastructure, but it's additionality that really will benefit residents, the companies that make New York City what it is. And that was incredibly important to us. We're really excited to see Champlain Hudson come online in 2026. We're excited to see that start to contribute. But, I think that financial structure is important, but we're every day really focused on who has the benefits, where do they lie, and the fact that we could bring new energy to New York City and clean energy to communities within our borders was really important. We also leverage different sets of tools. New York City is an advocate in the regulatory space. We don't make many of these decisions our own, even within the borders of New York City, but we do have land use and we do have property. And so in order to support offshore wind and make sure it can interconnect to New York City, we are transforming the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal to be both a point of interconnection for offshore wind developers, but also a construction, staging, and operation and maintenance staging ground. So when the offshore wind is getting built and is being run, there is footprint close to the projects that can support those continued operations and bring jobs to New York City residents, right? Like if we had those facilities out in Long Island or New Jersey, we wouldn't, our residents wouldn't benefit from the work that that's going to create. So that is a tool that's been really important to us, even though offshore wind is very much regulated by the federal government, the state government, and the kind of purse strings are controlled by NYSERDA. Another example of how we're trying to shape the broader market, our Department of Environmental Protection operates 14 wastewater treatment plants throughout the city of New York. We are rapidly expanding our organics collection, and we're processing much of that organics in our wastewater treatment plants. So we have the first operating renewable natural gas plant at our Newtown Creek wastewater treatment plant that is capturing methane from the operations and converting it into natural gas that's sufficient to feed back into the grid. So really that locality is again important. We have real concerns about bringing renewable fuels into New York City from elsewhere for all the reasons that were discussed above. There's a ton of greenwashing. There's a ton of uncertainty about their generation. The transportation, is really hard to document at this point. And not that, our ears aren't closed, but if we can create a local market for renewable natural gas from the waste streams that are maybe reducible, but in large part unavoidable, then that really not only helps us make sure that we are truly reducing emissions, but it also directly reduces, gives us a vehicle to power a really hard to decarbonize operations in New York City, say ConEd steam system, and really embeds the production with like where the benefits are flowing through to. And I think that's the next step for us is right now National Grid is selling the attributes in the California market, but we're working with them, the state regulators in ConEd, to come up with a deal where they can sell those attributes to ConEd for the steam system and like looking at how we can expand that to other hard to decarbonize and critical facilities for New Yorkers. So that kind of physicalness of energy and infrastructure is really what guides a lot of our decision making. We certainly think about the markets, think about how New York City's own energy bills need to not just react to the changing markets, but also help shape them. So I think there's a lot of growth. I think we're really excited about NYPA public renewables. We're working with NYPA on energy storage. I think we have a lot of work to do, but our guiding principle really holds tight to keeping benefits in New York City, bringing benefits to New York City, and improving our infrastructure so that it can continue for generations to serve New Yorkers. So then what do we need to do in the city? We are a city still largely powered by natural gas for our heating. We are never going to produce enough renewable natural gas locally to offset this. We have significant uncertainty as to whether hydrogen will ever be produced at scale or can ever safely be fed into a distribution system. And so we've got to think about how to transition buildings off of natural gas onto electricity, even if there are a handful of pockets that are going to continue to be hard to electrify. So we're doing a lot of thinking there, but again, it's like a place where despite the city's omnipotence and the fact that this infrastructure runs through our streets, we hold very little control. And so thinking about what are the right levers to pull to get the state, which often has its head up in Albany and single-family homes and upstate politics, to focus on the unique needs of a dense urban environment, how to get ConEd and National Grid to collaborate and speak to each other, and how do you get these corporate entities that were created generations ago and are very poorly suited to transitioning their business model, particularly in a way that's affordable to ratepayers, to come to the table and not just develop the financing and the corporate governance structure that will get us to a transition, but also just a block by block plan for where do we start and what's appropriate and what work will actually make this building a better home for people. So we need innovation here. Like, this is my call to you, right? Yeah.
One concern I always had, I know you should push, I think New York City is resiliency. Like, relying 100% at that point on the electric grid. But now you have some diversity. There's the natural gas, backup and heating. How's the city thinking about that?
Well, I think, first of all, the system's not resilient now if you're living in an apartment, like, and gas goes out. Like, it kind of doesn't matter if you have a fuel mix to the person whose heat's not working. So I think, there's like kind of big picture redundancy, but the micro still like hurts when something goes out. And, I think some of you probably know how close we were to a natural gas failure a couple of years ago during the winter season. So these threats are becoming real, the heat waves in the summer, the aging infrastructure, but I also think that there's a lot of work to do on the capacity side. New York City is really working hard to think about how to bring battery storage at scale to New York City. And, I'm sure if any of you are in the battery business, you were like scratching your head on that one because it's really hard here and there's a lot of opposition. But we see the real conservative takes that the fire department takes to safety as being essential, like as the industry's nascent, because we have a lot of NIMBYism around batteries. And so we need to be able to point to an incredibly professional fire department that is taking a very strong line to how safe these systems have to be in order to prove the concept and get the technology where it needs to be built safely in such a dense urban environment. I do think you're right. They're like technological questions that we're going to have to solve to make things electricity ready. And we're going to have to really work to build out our grid capacity. But right now, I don't see an alternative. And I think it's better to be thinking about that challenge because we see where the technology goes than hedging all of our bets on a natural gas and renewable natural gas and hydrogen market that is a little bit fictional. And, I think one thing that's also nice about the city is we can keep our ears open, right? Like, just because we don't want to see a plan that makes that bet today doesn't mean we're not open to having a conversation when the market starts to bear us out and we really have commodity on the table. We can talk about its affordability. We can talk about the reliability of the supply chain. But that's also why energy efficiency is going to be important forever and ever, right? It's like we need to reduce our reliance so that we run into these problems less often. So yeah, let me just make sure, there's another thing the city can do is try to make it easier to do business in New York City. We know we make it hard. We know this is an incredibly difficult environment to work in. And yet, we build magnificent things here all the time. And I think, I'm a firm believer that really rigorous regulatory requirements results in a better product. But we have to help you efficiently get through those regulatory requirements. And so we've started both a transmission permitting working group as well as a solar and storage working group to help fast track and more efficiently move through the various approvals and permitting requirements that the city has to give to developers, make sure that the agencies are talking together. We have 40 different agencies that have a piece of the climate puzzle in New York City. Within those, the number of agencies that govern construction in the roadway, DOT issues revocable consents, Parks has alienation concerns, DEP sewers are right in the middle of all of, right? We need to make sure those agencies are talking together, and that's a real role of the mayor's office, is to be that central place that is there to answer the problems for the private sector, but also there to make sure the agencies know what each other are doing. Similarly with storage and solar, we have to build Department of Buildings permits that really complement the fire department's permitting requirements. They have to undertake those reviews in a coordinated and expedited pathway. So we're really working with those agencies to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that we're there and not going to slow things down for projects that get off the ground. And so, then we get to this question of, as we're tackling the infrastructure, as we're undertaking this generational challenge to get to net zero, how do the buildings then interact? And this gets to Local Law 97. And how many of you were visiting New York City for Climate Week? Okay, so a lot of you. So we have a really awful habit of calling our legislation local law whatever number, and it's wildly confusing to anyone who is not deep in the weeds. So Local Law 97 is the keystone of the Climate Mobilization Act that was passed in 2019. It was one of the first and certainly the most ambitious building performance mandates in the country that requires buildings over 25,000 square feet to decarbonize over 5-year increments until 2050. To be frank, and if you guys work with developers or building owners, being the first out of the gate, you learn some lessons and there's some hindsight. A lot of the building performance mandates you have now have a graduated curve for compliance. As we drew a straight line in 2019. We also realized in a very difficult interest rate market that there are going to be some market conditions where building owners just can't get financing to replace systems even if they wanted to, right? So we're working through challenges. And at the same time, New York City government operations is obligated to comply with Local Law 97. So we're doing the work ourselves in our buildings, and we know how hard it is. And so how we've approached creating different pathways for buildings, particularly for the first compliance period, which is this year, and buildings have to report next year, is to create a different set of tools that buildings can use to come into compliance that still puts them on a path to net zero, but gives them some flexibility in these early years as we're all figuring out how to do this, as we're waiting for technology to get better, and as we're dealing with a difficult cycle or being kind of at the front end of a mortgage or a capital cycle for a building system. So one of the really exciting things I got to do this morning is we announced a new affordable housing offset program. Local Law 97 required the city to create an offset program for up to 10% of a building's emissions that they have to cut. And again, thinking very much about bringing concrete benefits to New Yorkers and keeping those benefits in the city. Instead of having a broad offset program that was really kind of market-based and abstract, we've created an offset program where building owners can put money into a fund that will fund electrification projects within the portfolio of the city's housing preservation and development department. So there's a program that they run called READY that electrifies and retrofits buildings, smaller buildings under the Local Law 97 threshold. So for a building that can't meet its Local Law 97 compliance, we can bring those benefits into low-income communities, into disadvantaged communities, and actually reduce emissions from a city building in a portfolio of buildings that can least afford it. And so that's one tool that we just announced this morning, and I'm really excited to see. I think there's a lot of uncertainty as to how the market will take advantage of this, but it could result in tens of millions of dollars to strengthen our affordable housing stock. As we've discussed, we allow for the purchase of RECs. Those RECs are for a portion and only can be counted toward a building's electricity use. We can't offset natural gas or fuel oil use through electric RECs. And again, it's because we understand New York City is subject to the inconsistency of the state electric grid and the delays that we're seeing at a state level to actually bring clean electricity to New York City. But we do need people to get off of natural gas and fossil fuels. So we shaped the market tools to achieve the physical change that we wanted to see. We've also introduced, or going to introduce tomorrow, rules around financial hardship for buildings, as well as how do you account for biofuels, how do you deal with the cogen systems that everyone was incentivizing 15 years ago. Like, there are a lot of challenges and a lot of change in how we conceive of decarbonization that affect the built environment that buildings are working through. So we're working hand in glove with lots of different types of building owners to understand what those sticking points are at a really granular level. And so each successive year, we'll start to tackle those problems and refine those problems. We provide wraparound technical support, not just through the work that the Department of Buildings and HPD does, but also through the New York City Accelerator. So if any of you have clients complying with Local Law 97, if you are on your co-op board or have a landlord, talk to them about contacting the accelerator, which both helps figure out the technical pathway, the engineering pathway to decarbonizing your building, but also the various incentives and programs that can help you get there. And then we're starting to really think about that next generation of carbon, our embodied carbon, our consumer-based carbon, and how do we make sure that the building we do is less impactful in addition to how we own and operate buildings. So those are, really the places that we're focusing a lot of our energy. They're really driven by what we hear from our constituents every day. And it changes, right? Like every year, there's a new challenge and the city has to tackle it because we're living it. And so it's an ever evolving set of work. But I'm happy to take some questions. And if there's something you're curious about that I didn't raise, go to town. Yeah.
Yeah, so one instrumental change has been clearly the COVID epidemic. Shaped the commercial landscape in New York City. Compared to a static commercial market, has it allowed for your organization to get more creative or implement these changes faster, given that there's been a turnover in buildings or less populated buildings compared to, as I mentioned, a more static market? Say, never been in this situation.
I mean, what we're hearing from private building owners, so I think there's public sector buildings. COVID put us way back. And we experienced all of the same supply chain issues and market challenges. But in addition, so the city has a Department of Citywide Administrative Services. It's akin to the federal GSA, and they're tasked with actually going into the buildings that all of the agencies occupy and doing the decarbonization projects. And DCAS is the kind of catch-all in city government. So they're also our procurement shop, and they're our civil service shop, and they're human resources for the city. And so during COVID, all of the energy people got deployed to go run immunization tents and clinics and testing. So even the people that do the work got deployed elsewhere for months at a time. And so we really did get slowed down and recognize that the private sector also did for a handful of reasons. So I think that challenge informs how we're thinking about compliance. One thing I forgot to mention was that within that series of pathways, there's a good faith effort pathway. So if you can show the Department of Buildings in the course of your compliance reporting that you are undertaking a rigorous process to plan how to get to net zero by 2050 for your building and actually engage in the contracts for vendors to do that work, that can count towards compliance, even if the work is not already done yet for 2025. So we know everyone's a little behind. If you can show us that you're actually committing to it, we can work with that. And then, within the market itself, I mean, you look across the street and there are floors that are vacant. We get that reduces revenues, but also we've heard that buildings really have to put a lot more money into making the spaces beautiful to attract people in the first place, rather than some of the systems. And how do you work in a building where, it's not vacant all at one time? But, I think another thing we're seeing is, you can't win, right? Like you create a building performance standard and everyone gets like really complainy about the building performance standard that's never going to make everyone happy. And we want people to take a step back. We have to do this work, right? Like tell us how you're going to do it and we'll figure out the legal structure. And we're all learning and kind of building the plane as we're flying it. But I think a lot of people in the noise have lost track of the fact that we have to decarbonize these buildings. And there's not another way around it if we want our planet to remain habitable. So, you know, we need the market to figure it out. We have to figure it out for our work. We have to figure it out as a city, but we also need the private sector to figure out how to finance it, how to pay for it, how to make it work in your lease structures. And, you know, we're there to help, but it takes everyone coming up with solutions. Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been really informative. One of my key questions is that, hello. New York City is such a multi-tenant environment. And so as we are looking to decarbonize in the city and build renewables on the grid, like distributed like in the city, like what initiatives are you potentially working on to provide more transparency? So as a developer, a lot of times, like when we file permits, it kind of goes into a black hole. And we have no visibility to understand where things are going, like where they are in the different stages. You talked and alluded to a couple of the working groups for solar and storage. I'd love to kind of learn a bit more of some of the initiatives that might be coming out to kind of help make that easier. And then the last thing is for us, like, I mean, I've looked at quite a few portfolios of community solar. I have some clients that are REITs in the city, but like it's simply gets hard to make it pencil because I'm looking at at least $1 per watt more expensive to build in the city than outside of the city. Are there things that you're looking at that would, while maintaining standards, enable us to be able to build and deploy at scale in New York City?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, our office is setting up working groups to really work through these solar storage, in particular, challenges now. If you're a solar storage developer and you're having problems, like we can like take those problems and see what we can do about them. But we also recognize it's not just the city that creates these problems, right? Like Con Ed is very slow. Like how do we grease all these wheels and do it so they're working uniformly? I think we really, you know, I have a very small staff, and while they are excellent and wonderful, like, you know, the city also just deals with the capacity issues that governments deal with. We're really thinking about storage right now. We're thinking about interconnection, but we know there are challenges across multiple different types of projects, and there are challenges that aren't ours. So, you know, we're focusing now on commercial scale storage, both thinking how we can like set up contracts to put storage on city-owned properties, but also how to make the private sector work better too. We haven't tackled storage in buildings. I think that's a much more difficult question for our fire department. We need to get to a place where batteries are more reliable and easier to maintain and operate, particularly by less sophisticated building owners, before I think that becomes super easy. But it's the next frontier, and I think we think that if we can get people comfortable with utility scale storage and we need to do a better job of telling people what the benefits are for their community and not just for the city or just for the environment. But if we can get people comfortable there over the next few years, then it's going to be a lot easier to have the conversation about building scale batteries. And then we know it's hard. Like, you know, the climate office is not going to solve the Department of Buildings challenges. And even the sustainability team at the Department of Buildings can't solve the challenges of the Department of Buildings, right? Like, we have to take it as it comes, but the more we can set up staff within the agencies that are there to help on the climate issues, on the decarbonization issues, but also into these like the accelerator that can kind of take that feedback and help us understand where the hiccups are, the better. And so like I'm working with a group of very large Mitchell-Lama affordable housing developers because they have some real unique needs, both on the financial side and on the engineering side. We've secured technical support from ULI to come do a deep dive on what are the pathways for those campuses of buildings. So we really are taking this feedback about what's hard and where there are no answers. And we can't necessarily create an answer all the time, but we're committed to like looking at where those priorities are. Did you have a part of your question that I forgot about?
I think you answered
what I wanted to say, this is what I was gonna, is what I didn't talk about is new buildings, right? So like the city passed Local Law 154. We hope that makes it really clear that you can't connect to fossil fuels in new construction. And so I think there's also a clarity of policy that is really hard right now because there's so much resistance. But I'm hoping in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we can get to a point of having it just be super straightforward that you can't replace a fossil fuel system with another fossil fuel system. Like when you are at the point of replacing a system, you have to figure out how to do it electric and how to do it efficiently. And I think like we've gotten there with new construction. We have like a very bright line of what works and what doesn't. And while you might still have trouble with the Department of Buildings, like at least you know going in what the standard is. Whereas Local Law 97 was the first one out of the gate. We were trying to kind of keep everyone happy. So it's much more ambiguous, right? Like building owners and developers have to figure out what to do to hit a mandate as opposed to being told what to do about a particular building system.
Thanks. You mentioned several times the importance of equity in terms of your office and the work that you do. And I'm curious if you could go into more specific detail about how your work and how the city and climate efforts particularly is engaging with local communities and delivering benefits to historically disadvantaged communities and organizations, how you're hearing from people in the communities that have been affected by historic environmental burdens, and how you're delivering material solutions to address some of those issues that are being faced by the members of those communities.
Absolutely. So one thing that was incredibly exciting and transformative this year is that the city released its first environmental justice plan. Not many cities have done that. There is a real value to having a city put its stamp of ownership on a report that lays out what the inequities are and what how compounding exposures really affect communities. Along with the report, we created an interactive mapping tool that has hundreds of data layers along with our disadvantaged community footprint so that anyone can go play with what's an issue in my community? How is my community different than this community over there? Like make really transparent the challenges that we need to tackle. The next phase, and this is a statutory requirement, is that building on that transparent foundation of problem identification, we're in the process of coming up with an environmental justice plan that really brings together stakeholders, environmental justice groups, community representatives to align on the commitments that we need to make the situation better. Some of those are going to be like very particular projects, little and big, but a lot of them are going to be procedural justice. How do we make our budget decisions better reflect our communities and where there's been historic disinvestment? How do we create better systems for participation and engagement, particularly for families and communities who work off hours? So I think that we're really committed to understanding the problem and having a transparent conversation about how to make things better. I think also getting back to that concreteness, it's both about the kind of higher level what is justice, questions of equity, but it's also about like, let's make sure we're building covered bus stations more prevalently in neighborhoods that have higher risk for heat exposure. Let's make sure that the actual work we're doing on the ground matches the priorities that become clear from the data. So because our offices houses both energy as well as climate adaptation, we're really looking holistically at how those investments work together. Another great example of this is we launched 2 years ago now, the Climate Strong Communities program that is our vehicle for going into communities that are a particular risk for climate impacts, whether they be flooding impacts, heat impacts, or both, and workshopping with community members. What are your priorities? What are your solutions that you want to bring to the table to solve these problems? And then taking that feedback that's really grassroots driven and finding funding opportunities for it. So taking the projects that come out of a community planning process and going and finding funding, whether that funding is realigning city budget investments or whether it's going and tapping into Environmental Bond Act and federal dollars. So I think we're really focused on engagement in terms of the built environment. And we're a year into the first cohort of Climate Strong Communities and have just announced the second cohort of Climate Strong Communities. So we see this as a program with a long life. And then, the next example I'll raise is that we did a deep dive a couple years ago into and this gets back to your solar question, where are there gaps in accessibility to clean technologies, clean investments, and in particular identified that New York State programs really have a hard time funding solar in low-income communities in New York City because our dense urban environment very much confuses state agencies often. But also the private market isn't solving for that because oftentimes they go to low-income homeowners and the roof and the electrical is going to cost so much to compare that it doesn't print it. So there's this gap of 1 to 4 family, low and moderate income homeowners. So we joined NYSERDA in Solar for All grant application, and ultimately NYSERDA was awarded $250 million, 40 which is coming to New York City. And instead of just flowing through that money to programs that already exist, we're using it to create a whole new program to very much focus on this gap of 1 to 4 family low-income homeowners. So we're in the process now of building that governance structure and creating the right partnerships to make sure we can really market to the right communities. We can successfully undertake the customer service that's going to be necessary to serve these communities. And so hopefully next year we'll be able, I'll be back here talking to you about public solar being real and people should go out and access it. So, I think we're really focused on gap identification and then what are the pieces and partners we need to pull together to fill those gaps.
I think this will be our last question.
As a visitor to the city, I'm not sure if it's a thing that you have as a policy for all buildings, but the energy efficiency ratings, shaming is a great incentive, I think. But as a city, are you able to stay current with your mandate to green your buildings yourselves? And are you doing that? And where are you prioritizing as far as moving along the curve yourself as a city, and what kind of projects are you focused on primarily as the low-hanging fruit for you, and how do you see that progressing?
And by that, do you mean the cities that the buildings that
yourself,
we own and our
that are under
agencies occupy?
Yeah,
so
97.
New York City owns 4,000 buildings, and they range from small police precincts and low-density communities to 25-story office buildings. We also own infrastructure. So our obligations under local law 97 are slightly different than private sector buildings. We have a portfolio approach. No, but they require us to go further faster. So we have a portfolio approach. We can decarbonize under the whole portfolio rather than meet our obligations for each specific building. There are 4,000 of them. That wasn't going to happen. But the trade-off for that flexibility from the legislature is that we are held to higher targets earlier. So our obligation is to decrease city government operations emissions 40% by 2025 and 50% by 2030. And I explained earlier, we know how hard it is. We know how COVID hit us. Like, we are going to be a year or two behind hitting our 2025 target for a lot of those very real reasons. Also, when the law was passed, we expected SCHMID to be online in 2025, and that that 100% renewable electricity was part of our calculation. And because that's behind, we're behind. But we have a lot of confidence we're going to make our 2030 milestone, particularly now that SCHMID is in construction. And we're really excited about that. And I think our approach to doing that work and actually decarbonizing buildings really shows how the industry's changed, right? Like, when we started 5-6 years ago under the banner of Local Law 97, we were super focused on just energy efficiency projects, like the not very exciting, like, just go in, do energy audits, take out the low-hanging fruit. And I think what's really exciting, and this is the work that the Department of Citywide Administrative Services does, but I think what's really exciting about the way that that agency has approached the challenge is that they're looking at innovation, not just in the engineering space, but also in the government process space. So where we figured out the kind of low-hanging fruits, solutions, deep energy, or not deep energy, the like energy efficiency retrofits, lighting retrofits. We then also created procurement vehicles and programs to expedite that work. So we launched this year our first design build contracts, where we're clustering buildings by type to install solar, and we're clustering buildings to do design build lighting retrofits. We have a whole system that's chugging along for energy audits that then goes into a retrofit program and measurement and verification. So with a portfolio as big as ours, we have to scale. And so we're scaling what's not easy, but straightforward at the same time as we're doing deep work on storage and geothermal, and even like looking at other heat sources. So it's a little bit of everything. And like, once we get some proof of concept, we get some interesting projects that are kind of, sexy, and we can go and show them off. Then we figure out how to do them at greater scale and what are the governance pieces we need in place to be able to do that. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Katie. So I'm going to wrap up, and then I believe we have a challenge of empty glasses out there that was issued earlier on. So I will respect that, Liz, for that. So I just want to say thank you, and just kind of think about how we started off in FERC land and moved our way into discussions about emissionality and thinking about finance and where that comes from, thinking about 24/7 and dealing with RECs. And as we all become and embrace our energy geek and energy nerdiness, I am just reminded of this. My physical, how I remember Kevin is that there is this vein that comes in his neck, and his head got blotchy right here when he got excited about a topic. And he definitely would have been excited about all the things that we were doing today. So just to remind you, if we have our students here, and I hope you do get a chance to talk to them, just to think about the diversity of our program. It is New York and Nevada and Minnesota and Texas going to Missouri and Iowa, and New York again, that we really are thinking about all across the land from which we are doing stuff. And one of the things that Kevin emphasized, and I want to tell everybody here, that you are smart enough to do, as Katie was saying, make things better. That no matter where we are and what we can, where you think you are smart enough to do this. And that was one of the things that Kevin told every student that walked into his office. He often would phrase it as, I've been in the room with these people. Trust me, you're smart enough to go do this. I've been in the room with all of you guys, and trust me, you are smart enough to go do this. And I appreciate what you are going to do. And to pull from Abe's comment, Abe's phrase he used in the beginning was, we talk about our human supply chain constraint and how do we make more of you. That's always been my issue as a professor, is I just wish I had more of you. So if there are opportunities you'd like to talk to me about that, please come find me. I'll be working on the empty glass challenge, hopefully with a lot of you. And I appreciate each and every one of you for coming, spending time with us. If you have, just as an administrative note, if you're getting CLEs, remember that you need to sign in and sign out, and there's a feedback form over there to pick up. if you are thinking about supporting our mission and what Kevin asked with the creation of what Kevin was doing and why we created the Kevin B. Jones Fund, you can talk to me about that. You can find information over there as well. And I just want to say that I appreciate you. And this has been our first foray to Climate Week, our 11th annual Alumni and Energy Symposium. And we are excited about where our 12th will take us. So thank you all.